Welcome to Voices of the West by Dusty Saddle. Today we are talking with Jack Bonham, part of the J.J. Bonham team, prolific author, over 36 novels to his name, and probably a lot more than that we haven't seen yet, and coming out on a regular basis. Jack, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. It's nice to see the mastermind behind all the covers.
Definitely enjoy doing them all. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started here.
Well, I knew I was going to be a writer most of my life, and I've heard voices in my ears over the years from the time I was little, and they always had an Irish accent. So I think it's my ministering angel called O'Flannery, and I think I saw him once when I was bartending, but that could have been just imagination. But anyway, so my first wife kept telling me I'd never be she was a person that was into grammar, and she told me I'd never be a writer, that my grammar was so bad, and that you just love people like that. You're married to them, they're constantly telling you, no, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. And so anyway, when I finally made it, I sent her an email and said, well, what do you think of that? Anyway, I applied to the Yale School of Drama late in life. I was 42. I'll tell you a little story about that. Maybe I probably told that on another interview. It doesn't matter. But I found the $50 for the interview by a bunch of trash cans where a homeless guy was hanging around at midnight in Dallas. And the $50 bill was between the trash cans. That's what it cost to apply to Yale. I used it. It was dry. I applied. I got in. So 2 weeks into Yale, I tried to drop out, but the major professor, Milan Stitt, he took me aside, took me to a Mexican restaurant, and we talked for 4 hours and basically showed me I could do what needed to be done. I had the mistaken notion, like most authors, that you needed to be free to really write. And what you really need is to have form and to fit in your content. And there has to be structure. Without structure, you can't have any freedom. So he showed me the basics of form, and I learned it, and there you are.
Keep running it all the time and churning things out very fast. So yeah, it's worked well for you on that.
Yeah.
What took you to Westerns?
What
took you to Westerns?
Well, when I was bartending, a lady came in and saw that I had a Louis L'Amour on the bar. She goes, I see you like Westerns. I said, yeah, I do. And I'm in Montana, and I had horses. Anyway, I always thought of myself as a cowboy, So she said, well, I'm going to have my husband drop off some books for you tomorrow. I said, okay. So I expected this guy to come by with 2 or 3 paperbacks. And he came in with 36 volumes of Max Brand in hardback. Oh, yeah, the whole thing. So I sat down and read every bit of Max Brand. His real name was Frederick Faust. Mm-hmm. He died in World War II in some hills in Italy, being a war correspondent. He wanted to write his Hemingway novel about the war, but he died in it. But I liked his notion of the West, which is mostly fictional. I mean, he just made shite up, and you can't pin him down. And every once in a while, in the middle of a novel, cowboy will make a phone call. I'm like, well, could be. There were Geronimo wasn't.
1880, there was actually a phone in Texas.
Geronimo wasn't caught till what, 1928?
Yeah, exactly. Lots of phones by then.
Yeah, so I liked Frederick, the way he approached the subject, and he was a classical poet, and he disvalued his writing of Westerns so much that when his daughter, he lived in a villa in Italy. Obviously, he was getting paid better than we get paid at Dusty Saddles, but his daughter would ask him where he was going. He was going out this little house behind the villa, and he told her he was making shoes. So, you know, he didn't value a whole lot, but he did it every day. He wrote like something like 30 million words. It's crazy how much he wrote.
Yeah, an enormous amount.
Yeah, and I lived in the West almost my entire life. A lot of years in California, a lot of years in Texas, Montana. My dad was in the service, but we moved around a lot. But, you know, he had that John Wayne sort of feel to him. My dad did. So anyway, I love Westerns because they don't mess around with this woke nonsense. They don't. You know, and it angers me when people go back in time and judge previous generations by present day standards. That's a form of prejudice called presentism. And it's horrible. You can't do that. And I just like the fact that when I write a Western, I can say and just about do anything, because that's what they did back then, you know?
Yeah, if you're keeping it to the historical time period for where it was, that's what happens.
Exactly.
So what do you think makes a good Western?
You have to have a good main character, but I think for me, it takes a partnership, like Roy Rogers and the guy who owned Nellie Bell. I can't even remember his name. But I think partnerships work well in Westerns. A twosome that's out there doing things. That's the reason I love that Mountain Man series, the Uzziah Making of the Mountain Man, because he and Emmanuel just got into it all the time. And if you've had friends like this, you love them, but at the same time, it's like, God, you love to bicker with them too, because they're just not right all the time, and they think they are. Marriages can be like that too. But so I think what makes a good Western is a character-driven plots, lots of great dialogue which pushes the story forward, and really bad guys, bad guys. Mediocre bad guys are just not very interesting, you know. That's why I've never written anything about a sheriff, because I always feel like sheriffs are sort of peace officers in small towns, you know, breaking up fights in bars and kicking people out of houses when they don't pay their rent.
As opposed to having the freedom to basically have a guy walk into a town and do what he needs to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Or two guys walk into a town and cause trouble. One of them gets arrested, and then they do it.
So you kind of answered this, but what comes first for you, the plot or the characters?
Plot's always secondary to me, because I'm not a good plotter. My wife, Judy, the other J and JJ, she's a meticulous plotter, and she is always basing everything that happens in the books on plausibility. I'll write, and I'll put 5,000 words down, and she'll go in there and she'll come back. Well, why did they do that? Why did they do this? This isn't plausible. You got to change this. You got to change that. So it's helping me be a better plot guy, but I'm not a plot guy. I'm a dialogue guy. I love dialogue. I love conversation.
Got an acting background to all of this. You're certainly going to have a disposition towards dialogue.
Yeah. So I forget the question now. Which is more important?
Well, I think, yes, which was more important, the plot or the character? Or basically, it's which comes first when you're writing a book?
I think the characters come first for me. And then later, I try to make them plausible. After my wife says, "You can't do this," I've had her throw the laptop down on the bed. "I don't want to read this. This is stupid." I'm like, okay, I'll fix it.
So where do you get the inspiration for the characters that you put together here?
Well, I'm 76 years young, and I have met a lot of amazing people in my life. And I think most of them come from how I'd like to be if I could, if you know what I'm saying. the things I'd like to say to people when they say stupid shite to me, I'd like to come back. And sometimes I do. I slip up, and if my wife's with me, I get the elbow, you know. But yeah, it's more like it's fantasy. It's fiction. You know, it's me being. I'm a lot like Uzziah because I'm a godly man, as my wife's relatives say. I'm a retired pastor, but I'm a lot like Emmanuel because stuff comes off the top of my head all the time, and it's really hard for me to keep it in. I try to around her, but lots of times when she's not around, I just let her rip and usually get in trouble. But
well, we've made the transition now from the Uzziah book, boy, 1 through, I don't even remember how high we went with that, 20 something, I think, to now we're Uzziah and Emmanuel. What exactly happened that we're now featuring them as the duo now?
Well, they're Texas Ranger Scouts now. Number 1 in the new series, with the great cover that you put on, is about Emmanuel's burial. Uzziah thought he was dead, and if anybody's followed the series, he was buried alive once in Santa Fe, but that was a trick to fool this Federale captain. But this time he actually thought he was dead, but he wasn't. And Standing Bear, who used to be Ophelia Blanchard, and she and Emmanuel were bedmates for years after her husband was killed by the Blackfeet. She found out that he was still alive, but she only found out after she stole his body. She was going to bury him down by the settlement where she lived. She didn't want him to be up in the mountains where she couldn't see him every day, at least his grave. And when she got back down there to clean him up for the burial, she discovered he wasn't dead. He was gut shot, but it wasn't that bad a gut shot. And so she nursed him back to health, and couldn't tell Uzziah because he'd gone off to Texas to be with the Rangers. So in the first of that series, Emmanuel discovers that he's also got lead poisoning, heavy metal poisoning. When he fired his Hawken, he was always ready to have another ball go down the barrel by carrying several in his mouth when he was hunting. And sucking on balls is bound to give you lead poisoning, you know.
Well, that's something. One of the classic Remington pictures is the horseman on there with his rifle out in front, blowing the ball down into his rifle as he's riding so he can reload.
I would love you to send me that.
Absolutely.
You know, I would love to see that, because I just imagine that's how they would do it. You know, why would you go fishing around for a lead ball if you had one in your mouth?
It might be good for your cover for your next book on that, because I've had that picture laying around for a long time, and I can never find a good reason to have somebody riding on a horse with a gun stuck into his face.
Yeah, suicide by Hawken. That would be pretty hard. You'd have to use your toe, take your boot off. I even had in that romance series that I can't seem to get off the ground, I even had that woman beat that one English guy by having the balls in her mouth. And of course, you know, a woman with balls in her mouth, who could not like that?
Yes, fine selling points we have here.
Yeah.
So what's the most valuable piece of advice you've ever gotten about writing?
Whoa. A writer writes every day. Milan Stitt said that. And a writer doesn't know what he thinks until he writes it. You can't do anything in your head. It doesn't work in your head. It has to be laid down and followed in a linear manner for you to figure out what's going on. I don't think these things up. I write these things up, you know? So a writer writes every day. I mean, hardest thing is getting your butt in the seat. But after that, you just go. And most of it's stenography. I hear the dialogue in my head and I'm trying to keep up, you know?
So do you have a basic routine you have for every day for when you get to write? Or I know a lot of people have trouble with I just don't have time to finish a novel, or different things like that going on.
Yeah. And writer's block, I'm going to say it right now. That's a myth. Before this series, I wrote a 36,000 word novel for Nick about the beginning of the Texas Rangers, couched in how David took over as king after Saul tried to kill him. If you're familiar with that Bible story, right? I was every day I'm writing on this. I'm writing on that. I got through with the whole thing, and my wife read it, and she goes, "Oh, great! You colorized the Bible." But that was it. That's all I did. It was terrible. It was terrible. But I wrote every day, so I do have a routine. I get up, I do my stretches, or I go to the gym. I come back home. I sit down. My wife watches her recorded soaps from the day before, and I sit in here, and if it's too loud in there, I turn the music on, and I just write for about 2.5 to 4 hours, depending on what I've got to do. And sometimes I am awakened in the middle of the night by stuff, especially this autobiography that Nick wants me to write. That one's got me reeling. But and so if I feel like I have to get up and do it, I just get up and do it. But 2.5 to 4 hours a day, every day, except Sabbath. I don't write on Sunday.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That generates a lot of words over a very quick period of time if you can keep that discipline every day.
And I really don't do a lot of rewriting. Mm-hmm. I mean, she comes in and reads it and corrects. And then when I'm through with the whole novel, that's another thing somebody told me. Never go back and read what you've written until you're done with the story. Because you're going to think, oh, this is just terrible. Don't even try that. Just finish the story. It's best with screenplays because, a good screenplay is 120 pages.
Yep.
And you can go through a screenplay one afternoon, fix it.
As long as it takes to watch a movie.
Yeah. Yep. Most of what I put down stays down. So gets changed sometimes.
So what's the most difficult process for writing a book for you?
The most difficult thing is finding somebody who will publish everything you put out. I mean, seriously. And Nick was, I was with that other company for a while. The guy was a pastor, and I'm not going to say his name because thankfully I can't remember his name. But his granddaughter did the editing, and he would get back to me like, I can't believe you used the word quim. My granddaughter has to read this. And I'm like, people said things like that back then. It wasn't GP back in the 19th century. So I think the hardest thing is to find somebody who'll go along with your vision. And Nick. Nick belongs in Barnum and Bailey. I mean, he's a salesman.
He's a showman and a salesman, no question.
And he says mostly what you want to hear, but somewhere in there's a grain of truth about everything. And I don't think he reads any of the stuff I send him. He reads the synopsis.
He doesn't have time. Yeah.
No, of course not. He's got 150 writers or something like that?
Yeah. Things coming through all the time. He has no chance of being able to keep up with that.
No. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him one bit, but he's a very energetic and smart man. And he's also a godly man. He's religious, and we have some pretty deep discussions about stuff on text back and forth. I wish I could go to New York. He's going to New York. Turns out he's not really going to be in New York for all these meetings. He's going to be in Edison, New Jersey. That's where Thomas Edison lived. And I worked there one summer. It's a sleepy little burg. He's going to love it. So.
Yeah, I don't really see Nick in big city that often. That kind of two don't really go together that well.
No, I mean, the place he lives, I can't pronounce it, Leicester or wherever. It's really nice. It's That's where they buried Richard III. They pulled his body up and buried it again. It's beautiful out there. So, yeah.
Excellent. What Western story have you always wanted to tell but never had a chance to?
I don't think there is one. I mean, I've even written that Ariel's Prophet series where they travel through time, and I've taken the Western anywhere I wanted to take it. And it gets kind of, and especially Ariel's Prophet, it gets kind of sexual and everything. But and my wife doesn't like that series at all. But I tried to get my grandson he's a great drawer. He's a great artist. And I tried to get him to do some drawings for me, but he's a flake, like, I'm sorry, most of that generation. So no, I've told just about every tale I want to tell. I mean, there were some bizarre things that happened in the Uzziah Making of the Mountain Man series. I mean, the series starts out with them skinning the undersheriff of St. Louis and leaving him at a wood station for the animals to eat. So, you know, these were men who got what they wanted because they took it. And it sounds outlawish, but, you know, wrongs were righted by the people who got wronged, not by the judicial system, you know. So no, I let it all out, I think, when I'm doing this.
Excellent. What advice would you give to any new writer that was trying to get started?
Sit down every day and write. That's all there is to it. I mean, after I left Yale in '92, I sat for 10 years and wrote 36 screenplays. None of them got done. One of them is still optioned. It's about the woman who owned the last car that Bonnie and Clyde stole.
Okay. Yes.
And it's a wonderful screenplay. And Martha Little, who has a production company in LA, she still has it. But just keep going. Just don't stop. Don't think that you're not a salesman, you're a writer. Don't try to sell your own stuff. You know, if you want to get somebody who will publish it or look at it, but just keep going. Don't stop. Perseverance pays off, I think.
Absolutely. Excellent advice on all of that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us and give us your views on Westerns and the whole process of writing.
Yeah, don't forget to send me that picture of the guy spitting
Absolutely.
the ball.
Yes, I can get that right over to you. No problem.